Thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
Are there any commissioners in the room, in the conference room?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Chilton is here and Commissioner Hoekstra is here.
Okay, so with the addition of myself and Commissioner Sparati, that's a quorum, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We'll give another minute, a minute or two to join. Because as far as I know, the only person who said they would not be here, would not be able to attend was Commissioner Kale.
Commissioner Kale.
Okay, great.
Miss Woods,
Yes,
I have
ma'am.
not spoken to Miss Carter Coley, so I'm not sure if she will be in attendance or not.
Oh, I see.
Morning, everybody.
Good
I think
morning.
they have ABC commission meeting today. I think it sometimes conflicts with this meeting, so she probably will not be able to attend.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, this is Cassandra Hoekstra. I was saying that the ABC commission meets today, and for that reason, I don't know that Commissioner Carter Foley will be able to join us today.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. Okay, well, we have a quorum to proceed, so I will go ahead and call the meeting officially in progress. And welcome all. I hope you are enjoying your spring and not suffering with allergies. Some people in my own household are, but enjoying the beautiful yellow that spring is offering us all over the place. I love it. Even though I got robbed of an hour of sleep for the spring solstice. We love spring. So everyone, welcome. Hope you are all well. At this time, we'll call upon Director Shropshire to call the roll.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is well.
Good
Calling the
morning.
roll. Chief Deputy Secretary Hoekstra,
Present?
Chairperson Woods,
Present.
Commissioner Carter Cooley, Commissioner Chilton,
Present.
Commissioner Jimenez,
Present.
Commissioner Sparati, and Commissioner Wayne Kale. And our attorney with us this morning is Attorney Davis.
Present.
Thank you.
Hey, Manny.
Hey, Matt.
Thank you, Director Shropshire. Now for the consideration of the minutes from our last meeting, December 6th. Have the commissioners present had an opportunity, well, have you received it and had an opportunity to review the minutes from our last meeting? Yes. I hear no no's.
Yes.
So I'm gonna assume yes. And is there a motion? Any questions or comments on the minutes? Any edits, suggestions? Okay, great. So is there a motion to accept the minutes from the December 6th meeting, 2023, to accept those minutes as presented?
Make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Sparati. Is there a second?
Second. Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, could you please state your name?
I'm sorry, Cassandra Hoekstra. I second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor,
Yes, ma'am.
raise your right hand, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Those pass. Now I will ask Director Shropshire to present the commission with the victims' compensation update.
Good morning again. This morning, the commission will be reviewing 30 claims with awards totaling $782,810. And I want to take this moment to remind the commissioners that it's time for us to complete the statement of economic interest. It is due by April 15th, 2024. And if anybody has any questions or concerns, please feel free to give me a call. This morning, we are lucky, and I'm pleased to have Executive Director Dan Eddy of the National Association of Crime Victims Compensation Crime Boards, who's going to speak with us this morning, providing some information about how the board supports compensation programs. He's been working on our behalf for many years, and I want to let him give you some information and also tell us about his support of our compensation program. Welcome, Dan.
I'm sorry, sir. It appears you're muted.
I think you still mute.
You can, in the WebEx, down at the bottom left, you should see something that says mute or unmute. An icon or a button.
Another way to unmute is pressing the space bar in the keyboard.
Am I good
Sometimes.
now? Can you-
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yes,
It's a,
you're good now. Thank you, sir.
we use Zoom in our system, and so
Uh,
I kept clicking on the thing on my screen. Anyway, and as I was saying to the ether rather than you guys, it's a pleasure to be with you and to be a part of this. I don't want to take any more time. I know you're busy people. Board members have real lives outside of compensation. So and it sounds like, if I heard it correctly, you have 72 claims to get through and quite a lot of money to get through too. But I know my understanding is that that's a relatively small number of the claims that the commission gets. My understanding is that you get the more expensive claims rather than all of the claims that might go through the system. And one of the things I do is try to look at various little data points that might be of interest, and I think this is of interest. The average compensation award, the average compensation payment on a claim is less than $5,000. It's in many states, it's $2,000, $3,000, even less. So there's a lot of work that's going on that you all aren't, maybe you're aware of, but you're not seeing directly, and that's Lydia and your staff that are doing that. So let me ask you, Lydia, and we may have talked about, we haven't talked real recently, I know we talked a couple of weeks ago about this, about how long, I mean, I can go for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Is that about what you wanted to hear from me, or?
Yes.
Okay.
15 sounds good. And then that allows for time for questions, if any.
Okay. So the association consists of all the compensation programs. Some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you may have gone to conferences in the past. But when COVID hit a couple of years, it's 4 years now, it really put a stop on some of our conference activity, and then we've been focusing more on managers. So it may be that you've never participated directly in an association activity. We try to draw on you. I'm not the end all be all, the tell all. You guys are the ones that are dealing with the real issues. You guys are the ones that have the real jobs that are making decisions on claims. I'm just a support for you. I've tried to listen and learn for a few decades now and try to reflect that back to programs. You might also be interested in knowing that you're one of the few boards in America, only about a fourth of the states now have commissions or boards like your own. And about half of those are like yours, or about a third of them are like yours, and that they don't hear all the claims. They don't make decisions on all the claims. So the world of crime victim comp in America is diverse and interesting, but you all share the same task. And it's really pretty simple. It's getting applications from victims and their family members. It's trying to analyze those process and as fairly and consistently and quickly as you can, and then make decisions as fairly and consistently as you can. The other tasks that every program has, and again, I'm mentioning this because it just gives you a sense of what we try to stay on top of. Funding is a big issue. I don't think I've talked to Lee very recently about how the funding exists, what the status of funding for your program is, but we found that over the years, it's been growing in recent years, that more programs are seeing some funding distress. And that's occurred at the federal level too. You may be aware that on the VOCA side, the Victims of Crime Act that provides federal funding through the Department of Justice, you get about 25% of your overall spending and administrative costs from, if you bundled those together, the budget for North Carolina to pay for your staff, to pay for the claims that you're approving, the federal government puts in about 20 to 25% of that. You put in about 75, 80% of that, which is why they don't make decisions for you. Although I sometimes think that between you and me, they'd like to. And I'm going to spend about 5 minutes, I think, on the current events kind of thing. But I just wanted to give you a sense that, we're looking at funding issues these days. Outreach, trying to get the word out is always, it's a perennial focus, a perennial need for programs to engage in. We hope that our partners in the assistance side and police departments, prosecutors' offices, victim services are really doing their job. I think the brunt of that falls on them. Processing claims, programs are concerned about good technology, claims management databases to do that, and then making the decisions on claims in a consistent way. And that's where you guys come in. And that's where, as I say, I could spend maybe a few minutes on the relatively unusual attention that's being paid in the last couple of years on decision-making, your decision-making, other boards' decision-making in other states, and other program managers that are making decisions on claims as Lydia and her staff are, but they, as I say, in the large majority of states, they would be making decisions on all the claims, not just the ones that don't go to you as board members. So there's been news articles, the Associated Press. There's been a lot of attention from advocacy groups, and this is nothing new. You've probably seen it in your states over the years. I know you have. And the concern is that whether you're into, well, and this is what's new and why I'm having a little trouble, not trouble, but why it's a new thing for me to try to explain. I think the discussion and the debate and the concern from some, not all, outside of your office, outside of your commission room, has been whether you're interpreting the rules correctly and consistently. And what are we talking about? There aren't that many rules, right? And this is true in every state with exceptions and waivers. Victim is supposed to report the crime and cooperate with law enforcement. That's number one. Then they're supposed to, in order to get the money, they're not supposed to have done anything criminal or substantially wrong to cause their own victimization. And those are two basic rules. You have to file a claim, obviously, and there's a filing limit in nearly every state, but there's lots of waivers now, particularly for sexual assault and domestic violence. And then it's subject to a test of, if you have other resources, other private insurance or some government benefit program that would pay. But that's about it. So the debate or the discussion, the concern was whether or not you all were doing that consistently. Are you being fair? You know, are you interpreting police reports correctly? Are you not basing your decisions on spurious information or speculation, but rather on, you're not the investigators, you're not the police yourself, but on, you know, real information, and therefore making the correct decisions to provide compensation to some and not others. Now I think the concern and the debate, and we're seeing this at the federal level, we're seeing this in reports from advocacy groups, and less often, but there was a series of Associated Press reports on this. Whether or not the rules themselves are worth preserving. Should we have contributory conduct as a test? Why isn't every crime victim eligible, regardless of what they did? And that would be a big change, and it hasn't happened yet in any state, except in a few states when it comes to homicides. And as a result of advocacy work from local groups in some states, but also national advocacy groups are in this. The contributory conduct rules have been erased for homicides in about 4 states. But the concern and the demand and the push now is to get rid of it in every state, and not just for homicide, but for any claim that might come your way. I don't know if that's news to you or whatever. I'm sure you've had concerns expressed, because not that I know of any, but you know, every program has had concerns expressed about some of its decisions over the years. So, so I'd be curious what you think about that. The latest thing that's come, and I'll stop here and see if you have any questions. I should give you a little more information about the association, but the federal government, the Office for Victims of Crime, which controls the federal money, of course, sets the, under statutory requirements and authorization, sets the rules for getting a grant. It doesn't change your rules. The way the federal-state partnership works, and I'm not a federal employee, I hope you understand that. This is a nonprofit, I work for you guys, and the other states that are, and all of them are members of our association. The federal government can set some rules, and that will be a debate, interesting debate we may have with them, on the conditions for getting a grant. And what they would like to do is several things that could be of interest to you. One is to put the onus on you that contributory conduct would be a factor in decision-making only in exceptional, and that's a quote from their new proposed rule, exceptional cases. Not defined by them, I'm not sure what they would mean by that, but also according to specific cases that, and you're not talking about every individual fact situation, but the types of cases that would be in writing, you would have some policy in written form that would guide when you deny or reduce on contributory conduct grounds. So that would be one area where they've never touched on before, but they've published a rule that they'd like to set that as their standard or their rule, or their guideline, their condition for North Carolina continuing to get its compensation grant. They'd also like to make it clear that you have some burden to provide opportunities for victims to apply without reporting and cooperating to police. And again, this is a little, it's not clearly defined. If the health of the victim, if the safety of the victim, if there are cultural or linguistic barriers, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy, because I think the advocacy groups are clear. And I think these are sensitive areas. We don't have positions on this as an association, and I try to stay neutral in this. These are difficult areas to deal with, but I think some of the advocates would like to insist that if there are police problems, if there are law enforcement issues with certain communities, that be taken into account in determining whether someone is cooperating or fully cooperating in your mind, if that would be a reason why you might deny a claim. So this is what OVC has raised as issues. And so what they want is to, again, you to have some kind of policies that would give the victims an opportunity to explain why they haven't reported and cooperated. And then you're not under any, it's up to you to determine whether or not health, safety, health being psychological or physical, safety, cultural, linguistic, whatever issues might prevent someone in a reasonable way in your minds from fully cooperating or reporting cooperating. And of course, there's a, I think and I'm going to stop soon. At the end of this is the bill that we still haven't seen enacted into law that would essentially remove all these rules and essentially say that if you have a victim that applies, and perhaps if there's any way at all to determine whether or not a crime actually occurred, whether it be a medical report or a counselor's report or someone in an advocacy program, that would be sufficient to get it into your offices. And that could not be, if that wasn't there, if the police report and cooperation wasn't there, that wouldn't be a bar. So that's a new discussion. I would say that although these issues have been kicking around for a long time, now it's been focused on actually a federal government agency with purse strings that is now pushing this onto states. So that's where we are. Now the association, just really quickly, I maintain contact with Liddy through consistent emailing. We'll have a discussion about this very thing I'm talking about next week. And I'll be sending, Liddy may not know that, but we'll be having a discussion on this next week, Liddy, because this is kind of coalescing now and we got to move quickly on it. We have an annual conference. We're holding it in Nashville this year in the first week of April. We also participate in OVC's VOCA conference, the national conference that OVC puts on, and they generally do that in August. And we try to stay in touch with our partners in other associations, other advocacy groups at the national level, just as you do in the local level. So Liddy, that's about all I had to present. If Liddy has questions, not about this, but in general, and Liddy's one of those folks who does ask questions. I'm here to try to respond as quickly as I can, to give it my first priority to try to get the information that we've gathered from other states. If we don't have that information already, we try to gather it quickly. One thing that Liddy asked me recently was, which will have to be a formal thing that that the legislature may have to do if you can't set a policy to waive it, is that the one thing that we know you've got to do because Congress said you have to do it is if a sexual assault victim submits an application and it's beyond your filing limit, but the reason she submitted it late was because she was waiting for her rape kit to be processed, and there was a delay in that. And after it was processed, there's a reason then for her to file a claim that you couldn't deny it because it was late filed. So Liddy, that's all I have. Happy to answer questions or respond. I also just say thank you for all that you do. I know the North Carolina board's been around a long, long time and has served a real purpose over many decades.
Thank you, Dan. I do have one quick question for commissioners. We often get question contributory misconduct. Can you just give us an example of how that process looks for many other compensation programs as well when they make that decision about contrib?
Sure. Of course, we could do an hour on this. I'll try to do 2 minutes. Excuse me about my voice. It's still kind of winter and dry up here in the north. So every state deals with the same claims you do. You get a police report that says that the reason someone was shot on this particular street corner or this particular house was because there was a drug transaction going on, or it was a turf war or whatever, or there was a gang activity going on. And what we've tried to talk about, I was going to say teach, but the association is not in the position of trying to tell you exactly how to do all this, but we've tried to teach one basic thing, and that's probably where I'll have to stop this our little discussion, and then at least my part of it, and get your question. Contributory misconduct is two things. It's misconduct, and that could be drinking. If you're not, it could be dealing drugs. It could be assaulting someone. It could be engaging in a fight. It could be, you name it. You know what those things are. That's one thing. Misconduct is one part of the test. So if you have someone that's drunk or under the influence of drugs, or maybe has drugs in their possession, well, maybe that's misconduct. But then it has to contribute. It has to cause. And I'm telling you what the courts have said. In North Carolina, by the way, that's one of the cases that we use, that it has to actually directly cause what happened. It can't be misconduct alone. It has to cause what happened. So we've tried to teach that. That's the difficulty. The thing is, the third part of the test is you want something substantial, criminal activity that's substantiated by police information. Not something that's just in poor taste or stupid to do. And those are where the gray areas creep in. So is that sort of what you wanted me to get at?
Yes, thank you.
And one thing I also should note is that, this whole thing about whether contributory kind of cases are exceptional, we know by looking at state data that the number of claims and the percentage, the national median out of all the claims that come into programs, each program, state by state, less than 1% are denied for contributory conduct. So it's not a big, it's not a big portion of what states do. Anyway.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions for Dan?
Caroline
Hey,
Blunt.
Liddy. I'm sorry, Chairwoman Woods. Okay. I'm Caroline Ballin. Dan, thanks for being with us today. Quick question. I know OVC has put out their new kind of guidance code that it's now in the public comment period. Do you know what the proposed timeline is for that to be finalized and then come back to the states with some guidance for implementation?
We know that they closed the comment period on April 5th, but we don't know. And that's one of the concerns we have is if states do need to rewrite policy, or perhaps in some cases, and I don't, at this point, I'm not at all sure that statutory changes aren't going to be necessary, but they may need time to do that. So they have not said when they will be finalized, or the effective date, in other words, when they could come around and say, are you complying with this?
Quick follow-up question. Here in North Carolina, our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has had a ACES task force that he has convened to investigate the impact of adverse childhood experiences on the criminal justice system, and a series of recommendations that have come about as a part of that. One of those is to try to increase funding for victims' compensation, which is great, but the focus really would be to provide mental health services, to help fund mental health services for secondary victims of crime. For instance, if there was a child maybe in a domestic violence household, or that's the example that comes to mind. Do you know of any other states that have really tried to expand the reach into secondary victims and for mental health services?
It's a good question. We do have some information on that. I mean, I think typically there is some latitude. There is some latitude in many states, and we have information on that. But I wouldn't say every state. I think we're talking about potentially a lot of, I'm sure that's the concern. I don't know if they've put a number on it in North Carolina, how many would be involved, but The short answer is that it's not unusual, but it's not universal. That states, obviously in homicide, yes, but when it comes to, there is in nearly every state some counseling available to close family members, which would include brothers and sisters and parents and that kind of thing. But when it comes to other types of crimes, it's more unusual.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate the information, and just that our commission has been grappling with these issues, as probably, like you said, all other places in the country, trying to look at where we can reduce, to the extent that there are any, reduce obstacles to for victims to obtaining the help that they need. And so for me, as an advocate, for me, it's good to hear that this is also being considered at the federal level. What it's going to look like, we don't know, but for me, it's great conversation and very timely, very delayed in my opinion, but great to know that this conversation is being had. And I appreciate you joining us today.
In my mind, I think, and again, I'm trying to be neutral in this, and the association, again, I mean, we already have 4 states that don't require contributory conduct analysis in homicides. And we have a number of states where either by statute, not many by statute, for sexual assault and domestic violence. There are a handful of states by law, and then a lot of other states that say they do it just by waving people in. For sexual assault and domestic violence victims, not requiring full cooperation or reporting. But what I find, what is different now, I don't focus on one area, and that is this. I think it's clear that North Carolina's legislature and other states, when they set these programs up beginning in as early as the 60s, but most of them came on in the 70s and 80s. One of the fundamental principles was that these public funds are not going to be spent on criminals who are victimized in the course of committing crimes. And that really wasn't questioned. It was sort of a fundamental principle. The other principle that, well, reporting and cooperation is about encouraging people to participate in the criminal justice system and help us get the bad guys off the streets. I think that's sort of faded away. I don't think we can really say that too many victims, oh, I can get compensation, that's why I'll report and cooperate. I mean, they're either going to or they're not for other reasons. But reporting and cooperation is important to a program on a practical basis. That's how you get the information to make contributory conduct decisions. So if you sort of just completely waive the reporting and cooperation, you may never be able to make contributory conduct decisions. And I think what's interesting is I think that's where the advocates, national advocates, and maybe you're seeing this at the state level, and the national advocacy groups are coming in to work with local groups. That's where they want this to go. They want the rules to be gone. Now, whether or not the state legislators or the public wants these public funds to be used for those victims who may have caused their own victimization is another matter. But the fact is that there's only really one user group. The user group are the advocates representing whoever they're representing and coming to legislatures and finding pathways into committees and whatnot to get these bills introduced. So there's really no other side on this. There's only one side that's demanding these types of changes. And then again, I'm not sure the legislatures realize this is sort of a fundamental change, that your program could become one in which you're not looking at whether there was law enforcement reporting or cooperation. You're not trying to figure out if someone was dealing drugs and that's why they got shot. So, those are sort of fundamental changes that I think we're now seeing sort of come in not an exact way, not in a, you got to do this way from OVC, the federal agency. But certainly when they say that contributory conduct should be only happen in exceptional cases according to specific policies that identify when you're going to do it, that's what they'll be, that's what will be guiding the, whether you guys get a grant or not. So it sort of put things into an odd place when they used to leave this all up in your hands.
Dan, thank you again.
I see it.
I'm
appreciate-
sorry, I think there's another hand, Commissioner Sparati was
Oh, I'm
raising.
sorry.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
I just was curious, are there a lot of hospital lobbyists in the states or in the federal level that are getting involved in the rulemaking?
Not that I've heard of, not that I'm aware of. You would think they would be, but I just haven't heard of any. Except in one area, that's with regard to sexual assault exams. And that may not really be the hospitals, but that's a perennial source of concern, is that when they do forensic exams, they're not getting paid enough. Have you heard of anything, sir?
No, I was just curious because they seem like a large secondary beneficiary of the money that we give out. So I'm just figured that they would probably want to find ways to get as much money as they could.
Well, thank you, Liddy.
Thank you. I appreciate your
Thank
time.
Well, have a good meeting. And if you
Thank
have
you.
a really, really interesting case to decide, let me know.
Okay.
I always learn. I thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Okay, are there any other items before we move into closed session?
I have no additional updates.
Okay. This is just on the agenda, so I will read it. Bear with me. When the time comes to go into closed session, the chair shall call for a motion from a member of the Victims' Compensation Commission to adjourn the open session and the remainder of the meeting to go into closed session to discuss the victim claims and other matters that may be allowed under law. The person making the motion shall state the following. I move we go into closed session under North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11, 1A1, which states, in order to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to the law of this state or of the United States, or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes. I will remind everyone that the records of the commission are privileged, and I will read from North Carolina General Statute 15B, our authorizing statute, -8.1A. In a proceeding under this article, the privileges set forth in General Statute 8-53, 8-53.3, 8-53.4, 8-53.7, 8-53.8, and 8-56 do not apply to communications or records concerning the physical, mental, or emotional condition of the claimant or victim if that condition is relevant to a claim for compensation. B, all medical information relating to the mental, physical, and emotional condition of a victim or claimant, and all law enforcement records and information and any juvenile records shall be held confidential by the Commission and Director. All personal information, as that term is defined in 18 U.S.C. Section 27253, of victims and claimants, and all information concerning the disposition of claims for compensation, except for the total amount awarded a victim or claimant, shall be held confidential by the Commission and Director, except for the information held confidential under this subsection. The records of the division shall be open to public inspection. This meeting is also being conducted virtually via WebEx and in person through the North Carolina Department of Public Safety Victim Compensation section. And I will remind everyone regarding our duties under the commissioners rather, that in accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every North Carolina Crime Victim Compensation Commission member to avoid conflicts of interest. If any CVC member has any known conflict of interest with respect to any matter coming before the CVC today, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in the particular matter involved. If there is a conflict of interest or a known one, just let me know. Okay, we then, so I'm gonna call for a motion that we go into closed session under North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11 as allowed in this section 1A1 in order to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to the law of the state or of the United States, or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statute. Is there a motion made?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second? I'm sorry, Matt, can you say your name?
Matthew Sparati.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that. Sebastian Jimenez.
Thank you, sir. All in favor, say aye. Put up your right hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Right hand. Aye. Any nays? Okay, great.